good afternoon and good evening. In 2008, the Government of Wales appointed the first Older People's Commissioner in the world. And today we have the great pleasure to be in conversation with Heléna Herklots, CBE. Heléna is the Older People's Commissioner for Wales, which is an independent statutory role established in law to protect and promote older people's rights. You know, Heléna took up the post in 2018, but she is certainly an experienced person in the field of older people and ageing issues with some 30 years experience. And Heléna and I met many years ago when she was at Age Concern England. But starting her career working directly with older people and their families in day centres and care homes, you know, Heléna influenced public policy, campaigned for change, and developed and provided support services for older people. Prior to her appointment, Heléna was Chief Executive Officer of Carers UK, the national membership charity for unpaid carers. Experience before that includes Services Director at Age UK, Head of Policy at Age Concern England, and Corporate Strategy Manager at Anchor. You can imagine that Heléna has led and contributed to a number of UK government advisory groups covering topics including care and support, housing, dementia, and carers. She's also spent a year on secondment working on older people's issues at the Department of Health. What struck me most importantly was, you know, Heléna's breadth of experience, but also the way that she touched different sectors and different disciplines. So currently, Heléna is also chair of the UK Industrial Strategy Healthy Ageing Challenge Advisory Group and a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. It's no surprise that in 2018, Heléna was awarded a CBE for services to carers. So I feel very honoured to be in conversation with Heléna today, and welcome, Heléna, to our IFA Global Café this morning.
Well, thank you so much, Jane, and thank you for the very kind words and warm welcome, and it's just lovely to join you all today.
So, Heléna, the first area that I wanted to sort of talk with you about is the work of the Commission on the abuse of older people in Wales, and I know that you have spent an extensive amount of time working on this area. So perhaps you could set the scene on the work that you've been undertaking across Wales around the abuse of older people.
Thank you. Yeah, when I became Commissioner, I undertook a consultation exercise with older people across Wales and identified some of the priority areas I wanted to work on. And I think part of that consultation was also thinking about where, as the Independent Older People's Commissioner, I could make a significant difference. And one of those areas was about the abuse of older people. And that really includes every type of abuse. So domestic violence, sexual violence, emotional abuse, financial. And it felt to me that it was an issue that was still in the shadows, not well understood, low awareness, and where thousands of older people in Wales were experiencing abuse. So about 3 years ago, actually not long after the pandemic started, I brought together what is now about 30 organisations across Wales. And we've been working collaboratively with older people to raise awareness of abuse, to look at issues like improving data, evidence and research, to work on improving support and services, changing policy and legislation where we need to as well. And that collaborative approach included working with Welsh Government. And what is really encouraging is the way in which that collaboration is now sort of bearing fruit. So Welsh Government in its...
Bear with us, and already I see that we have, you know, a question in the box from Elizabeth Mills. Elizabeth, you're interested in hearing from Heléna about the role that the new home share programs in Wales will be making. So bear with us, and as soon as Heléna comes back, we'll be able to respond to that.
Thanks very much. I don't know whether people know about home share and about the new home share programs that have begun in Wales, but there are home share programs all over the world where they facilitate older people and younger people to live together for mutual support and benefit. And there are a lot of programs. Home Share International encourages and facilitates the development of those programs.
Good. Well, look, as soon as Heléna joins us back again, and we hear a little bit more about the work that the Commission is doing, we'll be coming to you. All right?
Thank you.
Okay. So Heléna's just sent me a note saying that she's lost the connection in 2 minutes. I think one of the really insights that I got from talking with Heléna, and it was just this morning, is that there's been quite some discussions around the term elder abuse versus the abuse of older people. And certainly in Wales, there is a clear direction to talking about the abuse of older people versus elder abuse. And I think that that's really a significant move forward, just the same as people with disabilities versus disabled people. We're a person first. And so I think that that's something that all of us can take forward. It's about the abuse of older people. And Brendan, you've just mentioned there's lots of high winds where you are. So that may be what's happening with Heléna as well. So while we're just sitting here waiting, perhaps if I can just share with you that, okay, so Bridget, would you like to just make a comment? I think that's really pertinent. Bridget Penhale?
Yes, sorry about that. I'm also affected by the weather, so I'm hoping that I won't disappear as well midstream. It was just a point to say that in relation to England as opposed to Wales, we've been talking about safeguarding adults or adult safeguarding. So it's broadened out from just looking at older people. But in addition, what we've sort of moved to is talking about adults at risk, and sometimes adults at risk of harm, rather than any other shorthand. I mean, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's also encapsulating what you're saying about people, and acknowledging that there might be a range of individuals who are affected.
Yes, and of course, Bridget, you spent much of your career dedicated to the work on elder abuse. Would you like to sort of share any other perspectives that you've been working on in recent times?
That's a tricky question. How long have you got? Don't worry, don't answer that. I'm very impressed with what Heléna and her colleagues have been doing in Wales. And I think having an older people's commissioner, her focus is much broader than just looking at issues in relation to abuse and harm, but having it as a priority area is certainly really important. And I've had discussions with Heléna about the fact that she was hopeful that it might be possible to get some support from the Welsh government for the notion of a UN Convention on the Rights of Older People, because she sees that as being absolutely central. I don't know whether she's, how far she might have progressed with that, and it's not for me to say, but it's been complicated. And of course, Welsh government, although it is devolved from government in Westminster here in England, it's also part of that government. So it is a complicated situation, and we haven't moved to a point yet where England is wholly endorsing the notion of a UN convention, although it seems to be sort of halfway down the fence on the side of endorsing. I think they've done that consistently. In terms of the work that I've been doing, yes, you're right. Most of my career has been spent working in this area. I have specific interests in abuse of older women and intimate partner violence against older women, and been involved in a number of European level projects when we were still fully part of the EU. And more recently, I've been involved in some work that WHO have been leading on developing what's called mega maps, with groups in both led from Canada, but also from the UK on specific issues. And that work will be forthcoming during the course of this year, as far as I understand it. And in addition, we got the Home Office here had some limited funding in relation to work with perpetrators. And so a colleague and I managed to get some funding to look at perpetrators of elder abuse of older people. And we've, although our report to the Home Office was completed last year, we're still undertaking some work, and we haven't sort of finished publishing and stuff on that. So, you know, there's more stuff to come, I think, in relation to the whole area. Thank you.
Look, thank you very much, Bridget. And I'll just call on Dominic. Dominic, you talked in the chat box about what's going on in Nova Scotia. So perhaps if you can just come forward while we're waiting for Heléna to come back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. We have, I think about 13 counties in Nova Scotia. And I think throughout the province, we have senior safety coordinators. And what they do is, on one hand, they provide public education about things like fraud and other, sexual abuse and so on. And but they also can intervene to some degree to help people. Like they get reports that so-and-so is struggling, so they can intervene in some ways and involve police if necessary. I have a question, which is really, what types of education and other programming are most effective in countering abuse? I'd be interested to hear what people's wisdom is on that.
Look, thank you for that, Dominic. And we're going to take that question and pose it to Heléna, who I think is back online. Heléna, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me and see me okay?
Yes, we're perfect. So the floor is yours.
I'm so sorry about that. A little bit of snow seems to have caused havoc with my connection here, so apologies.
No, look, the topic is so inspiring and interesting that we've been having a chat amongst ourselves, and Bridget Penhale also shared some perspectives. So back over to you.
Well, thanks, Jay. So yeah, I was just describing really the way in which we'd got the work underway collaboratively in Wales, and the really important commitment from Welsh Government within its overall strategy for an ageing society, which is called an Age-Friendly Wales, to develop for the first time in Wales a national action plan to prevent the abuse of older people. So where we are now really is we've got a good policy framework which is underway. The consultation on that draft national action plan has concluded. We're now waiting for the final version. But we also have about 30 organisations as part of a national group that I lead, and many other organisations and older people working to increase awareness of abuse and develop the support and services that are needed. And some of my reflections from the work, I think, are around the link between ageism and abuse, which would be really good to discuss today. The lack of awareness and understanding amongst the public and professionals that abuse against older people actually happens. And the need to make sure that the services and support that are there for victims are truly inclusive of older people in all their diversity. So I'm really encouraged by the work that we've got underway in Wales, but there's also, it feels to me like a mountain to climb to get to a point where we can prevent abuse and we can make sure that if people are at risk or experiencing it, they can easily access the right support and services that they need.
Look, before I hand it over to Dominic Boyd, because he had a question early on, so we're going to, come backwards and forwards. One thing that I spoke about when you lost connection was, the debate and the conversation you've had about elder abuse and abuse of older people. And I think that's something that we can all take away with, and I'd like to know the origins of that. And also the way that you've brought many sectors and disciplines, around this issue. And so if you could just speak to those points, and then I'm going to ask Dominic to come forward.
Great, yeah. Well, we took the decision a while ago, really, to change terminology, and the change has pretty much happened across the UK. And we don't use elder abuse as a term now. We talk about the abuse of older people. And for many years, it was talked about as elder abuse, but that began to be a barrier in our view, of making progress, because elder abuse was seen as something different and other from other types of abuse. So, for example, older people who were victims of domestic violence, if that was termed elder abuse, they wouldn't necessarily get the response that they would need from services, because it was seen maybe as a result of caregiver stress or something else, rather than actually domestic abuse that required that sort of support. And also we felt that it could link into ageism and slightly ageist approaches, that somehow people would view abuse against older people differently. And we know that that's already a problem. So, for example, in the UK, there tend to be less prosecutions against older victims of abuse. And sometimes that is because those issues are not viewed as seriously. So I was really pleased actually to see that the WHO, in its work on ageism under the UN decade, has also now made that decision to change the terminology and not to talk about elder abuse, but to talk about the abuse of older people. And I do think that's important. And I've certainly found it helpful in my work that we can talk about it in those ways. And you mentioned, I think the second point was about collaboration, I think, Jane?
Yes.
Yeah. So we, I think this is so one of those issues where you can't make progress unless you collaborate. And it's also about drawing on the expertise of lots of different organisations. So, and learning together. And I've found that to be an incredibly inspiring aspect of the work, actually. So we've brought together police, older people, the health service, social care, youth organisations, all those sorts of different players, to learn together and to bring those different perspectives. Because the only way in which we're going to make progress is by all those organisations, together with the public, actually taking that action. And I think that's why we've been able to make the progress that we've made. And, you know, there've definitely been moments when we've been working when you can see the sort of light bulb moments in different organisations go on about, actually, this is something I can do in my organisation. So, for example, changing training of the police so that it much better includes issues about older people. You know, in changing the way in which services advertise what they do. So we've got a situation in many domestic abuse services, for example, where the imagery is mainly about younger women. So if you're an older woman or an older man experiencing domestic abuse, you might not think those services are for you. So even really practical things like changing the imagery, changing the language can make a difference. And that's why working collaboratively is so powerful.
We've also found, no, I won't ask that question. I'll get Dominic to come forward and then I'll ask my question. Dominic Boyd, you had a great question for Heléna.
Thank you very much. Heléna, I was over in Wales in 2014, loved it. My question revolves around what types of programs are most effective, have you found, particularly from a sort of a rural and from an urban perspective. We have numerous senior safety coordinators throughout our province in Nova Scotia, and I know they kind of struggle to figure out what sorts of public education in particular to do and what would be most effective. So any insights you have around that stuff would be great.
Yeah, thanks Dominic. And I think we're still learning that ourselves, but I suppose that the things I found most powerful about helping people understand what abuse of older people is, that it exists in the first place, and understanding the impact, is to enable survivors of abuse, people who've experienced it, to talk about it. So central to my work is that engagement with older people, and in particular, working to develop ongoing relationships with victims of domestic abuse. And, you know, I know when they tell their story, that has enormous impact. And their experiences of trying to get help and support. So, you know, we've worked, for example, on issues of the abuse of older men, and men have talked about the difficulty of coming forward and talking about their experiences, their sense that they won't be believed because they'll be seen as perpetrators, not victims. So I think enabling, supporting sensitively and carefully people to talk about their experience is really important. I think the rural urban issue is a really big one. So just this week, actually, I was in West Wales, a very kind of rural area, talking to a fantastic organisation there, West Wales Domestic Abuse Services, who are doing specific work with older people, and talked with some survivors there of abuse. And they talked about, you know, the problem if you're in a small community where everyone knows your business, and it can be very difficult then to say, actually, you know, this person that I've lived with, or my grown-up son or my grown-up daughter is abusing me. So making sure that services are in places where people go. So rather than as an older person, me having to go somewhere that says, this is for people who are being abused, I can go to see my GP, but the service that I need will be there to talk to me in that place. And if you need help, making sure, again, that we're thinking about the types of services that are suitable in a rural area. So one of the areas I've worked on is the problem about a lack of suitable accommodation for older people if they need to flee their home and their abuser. And in rural areas, you're going to need sort of quite dispersed units and places for people to be able to go, actually safe houses, specifically for the people that people can feel safe in. So I think there's a range of things. Most importantly, and I think this is where there's further work to do, I don't think there's been enough engagement generally with older people at risk of or experiencing abuse about exactly the type of services that would have helped them and that they need. So I think that's a journey we're still going on. But it is thinking specifically about those different types of needs and making sure, as I was saying earlier, that those services that exist for all ages are thinking much harder about how to make sure they are really inclusive of all ages and aren't putting up barriers to older people accessing them.
So that's a very comprehensive response, Heléna, but it also says to me that you're, you know, as the Commissioner, you're really at the front line. You've really sought to understand from those who have been abused, you know, the challenges, but also how do they access. Before I go on to Asha, Brendan, Elizabeth and Shmuel, I just want to ask about the degree to which we assume everybody has the same level of health literacy. Because in our work around vaccination, it's quite clear, you know, that we, public health, government, is assuming that everybody understands in the same way, but we don't. So to what degree, you know, is the work of the Commissioner, but also generally around, you know, the forthcoming plan of action on the abuse of older people, how have you taken that into consideration?
I think that's a really good point, and I think certainly what I've found in talking with older people is that the language we use about abuse isn't necessarily one that resonates. Because if you're, to give you an example, if you're a woman in your 80s and over in the UK, when you were growing up and when you were in your 20s and 30s and 40s, and if you were married, rape within marriage was not a criminal offence. So it just shows that the different situation and environment that older people have experienced through their lives. So then expecting them somehow to understand the language of domestic violence or coercive control is you know, it's not the right language. So we've looked carefully at how we have those communications, and we've sort of produced leaflets and information about, you know, being safe. Are you worried about someone? Using that type of terminology as well. But I think there's more that we need to do on that. Else there is a danger that we exclude or put up barriers to people seeking help because the language gets in the way of that.
Yeah, look, it certainly does. And it is a barrier in and of itself. But let me go to Asha, Brendan. If you can just give your question, Asha and Brendan, and then we'll hand the floor back to Heléna. Asha?
Okay, I just wanted to know from Heléna that how training for police officials will help. and how can it be done? Because it is not a small thing you can just go and tell. Police is very indifferent to the complaints lodged by the elders. I have met an old lady. She went to the police. She was thrown out of her house, but they just said, go home. Your son, actually, he threw her out of her own house. They just told her to go home. She went twice, and in the end, she had to leave her home and go away.
Look, thank you, Asha. What a terrible situation for that older person and many around the world. So hold that point, and Heléna will respond just after I ask Brendan your question to Heléna.
Yeah, Heléna, here in Ireland, we have what's called older people's councils who tie in with the local councils and then through Age Friendly Ireland. And I'm just wondering, have you got the same setup in Wales? Another point is that it's quite good here in that they're what's called community police. They are ordinary police, but they are actually a community police person. And they have, a lot of the time, their ear to the ground so that they're able to pick up stuff before it escalates. Thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Over to you, Heléna.
Thank you, and thank you, Asha, first of all, for your question around police and training. So we have an opportunity actually at the moment in the UK in that there was a lead police commissioner working on their sort of age equality strategy. And as part of that, we've been engaging with them to talk about what training can be put in place in terms of police training, so police cadets, and within the workforce. And in the action group that I brought together, I've included the 4 police forces in Wales in that. And that's meant we've been able to develop ongoing relationships and kind of understand their perspective in terms of what will work with their training. However, I think there are a lot of issues here, and your example really spoke to that. So I know from working with older people that there can be an issue about trust in the police. So particularly, for example, older people in minority ethnic communities who may not have that trust in public services or the police, they can be felt like a barrier to coming forward. So we've got a lot to do, but I've certainly found a willingness within the police forces to engage with us in this. And there are some excellent organisations in Wales who are doing training. So there's a fantastic organisation called Dowis Choice, which is based at Aberystwyth University, who is specifically doing some training work with the police forces. In relation to the Older People's Council's question, Brendan, so in Wales, we have what are called 50+ forums. And these were established some time ago with support and funding from Welsh Government when it brought out its first strategy for older people. And in our journey as a nation towards becoming age-friendly Wales, Welsh Government is supporting local authorities financially. We have 22 local authorities in Wales. So these are councils who are responsible for transport and housing and care. And they are the lead organisations that I'm working with in terms of supporting them to become age-friendly communities and members of the WHO network. And Welsh Government has provided some funding to each of those 22 local authorities to really drive that engagement towards older people in terms of developing as age-friendly communities. So I think we've gone through a phase where maybe those forums some had kind of advanced and flourished, and some had fallen away a bit. But this hopefully will start to reinvigorate those forums and engagement more widely of older people as well, including through intergenerational contact.
And I think, Heléna, from the Asha's comment, it's really the nature and form of family is changing also, and that impacts the well-being of all of us across generations, but also older people. And perhaps you could just mention, I understand that Cardiff is moving towards being a part of the global network of age-friendly cities and communities. Do I recall that that's we're moving in that direction?
Yep. So I set out a sort of an ambition really as Commissioner that I wanted all local authorities in Wales to develop as age-friendly communities so that the whole of Wales would be covered in that way. And me and my team are supporting local authorities to go through that evaluation of what they're doing, engage with older people, plan and commit to being on that age-friendly journey. And part of that commitment is by joining the WHO network. So Cardiff is a member, so our capital city is the first that network. And we've got 4 or 5 different local authorities coming through. So I would expect in the next 6 months, we'll have 2 or 3 more members of that network. And within my team, we're sort of hosting a community of practice so that we can learn from all the different places in Wales, the rural areas, the urban, the kind of different sort of populations, how we can really have impact in this way, and also link into the affiliate network with the WHO. So it's a really exciting journey, actually. And I think at a time when there are so many challenges, you know, post-pandemic and with all the pressures on our health and care services, I think working collaboratively again on how we can be more age-friendly is a really positive element at the moment. And I have to say, I think Welsh Government's been really supportive on that. You know, it's put some funding towards it, which is definitely...
Well, that's definitely unique too. But it is a very ambitious task. It's not about just signing up. You know, there are detailed plans, you've got to implement, you've got to prove. So for those that think that it's just a stamp, you know, it requires many layers of government, but at the heart of that is the voices of older people. So I'm going to go to Elizabeth Mills. Elizabeth, and then Dominic has just got a quick question. So Elizabeth and then Dominic.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. And it's lovely to see Heléna in the flesh again after, God, 20-something years. Heléna, I'm aware, I'm sure that you are aware of the new home share programs that have been set up across Wales, and the engagement of younger people with older people that is facilitated by these programs seems to me to be a really good way of preventing the potential for abuse. And how are you going to engage with those programs and facilitate the development of further programs of a similar kind across Wales?
Okay, thank you. And Dominic, you've got a quick question around age.
Yeah, I'm interested to learn what your perceptions are about age gaps in women accessing shelters when they're suffering from domestic abuse. The general sort of sense that I think there is in society is that it's more of a younger woman's issue, but I'm sure that it's not just a younger woman's issue. What has been your observation about that?
Thanks, Dominic. Heléna?
Thanks, Elizabeth, great to see you. So yes, in fact, just towards the end of last year, I was in North Wales, North Mid Wales in Gwynedd, where there was a great conference of older people where we were talking about winning this journey to be an age-friendly community. And one of the people presenting there was one of the home share team and talking about the new developments. And I think, you know, I'm a fan of home share. I think bringing younger and older people together in a very mutual relationship. And we know, don't we, that one way of, you know, challenging stereotypes and challenging ageism is to bring the different generations together. And I think the home share model is one that is very well suited actually to a lot of communities in Wales and to that sense of community in Wales. So I know there's a lot of interest and excitement about the development, and I'm sure it will go well. Dominic, to your point about shelters and refuges for people who need to leave their home because of domestic violence and domestic abuse. One of the areas I've looked at in terms of domestic abuse is specifically the accommodation needs of older people. And it was actually the first piece of work I did with the action group, and we published a report on it. And it is true that most shelters or refuges are geared up to younger women, often with, not always, but often with children. And then there is a very pressing need for that support, a very pressing need. But if you are, in your 70s or 80s, or maybe with a mobility restriction, that is not suitable for you. So one of the recommendations from my report, and what I'm continuing to push for, is more specific accommodation for older people who need to leave abusive relationships. So that might be older women, it might also be older men. And I mentioned earlier that there's work going on in West Wales, supporting older people. And one of the things they've actually done there is to establish a new provision for an older person who might need to leave. So beginning to look at actually specific accommodation that can meet older people's needs. I think the one thing I would just add to this, though, is we also need to make sure that we are giving as much as we can the option of people of staying in their home and their community, and the perpetrator being moved out. So there is also that issue about, if older people are in a community that's supportive of their near family and friends, why should it be them that has to go? So there's also that issue around making sure that they're, if it's about getting the perpetrator out, that can happen as well.
So Heléna, every week we have a colleague, Shmuel, on the line. And so I'm going to share his question. And I'm conscious that, much of your work as Commissioner has been in the middle of a pandemic, and the importance of digital technologies, but also the barriers that often presents to all of us, and also to older people. So his question is, how does artificial intelligence and digital technologies support processes in making Wales more age-friendly? So, and is there a relationship, or is there some work around digital technologies and the prevention of abuse of older people? So I'll leave that question with you. And I would, Mark Venning, you've always got an interesting comment and question. Would you like to make your comment?
Yes, I just made a quick comment that I've been involved with an elder abuse case a few years ago. And when I got involved with the police on the matter, because I was her personal power of attorney, rarely do we ever see in the messaging about this kind of abuse that's being called a crime, because that's what it is.
Heléna?
Yeah, so I would agree with you, Mark, actually, and just on the issue about we should call it what it is. And I think, and we do talk also about crimes against older people. I mentioned earlier, I find it worrying that there's a very low level of prosecutions against people who've committed those crimes against older people. And that is certainly an issue I continue to raise, including with the Crown Prosecution Service here and the police. And we need to get underneath why that's happening. That is quite a question about digital inclusion and artificial intelligence. And given that I lost my digital connection to you, you'll know that maybe this isn't my strong suit right now. So a couple of things. I think one of the issues I think that has prevented some of the progress on tackling the abuse of older people has been the lack of data and evidence, but also the lack of analysis and insight. And actually, I think there is something there that we can do more by combining different data sets and types of evidence to fully understand what's happening and to make better decisions around support and services. On digital technology, we can certainly use that, and it's used in issues around violence against women and domestic abuse and sexual violence. So, people being able to online get help, or use text messaging, or those sorts of things. So it does have a role to play. But we do have a big issue about exclusion digitally of older people. So about 30% of people over the age of 75 in Wales are not online and have no digital access. So in looking at how digital can help, we also need to make sure that we don't rely on it, particularly for the older age groups who may not have access to that.
we have quite a tricky question from Eileen, Heléna, and Eileen is with us, you know, many, many weeks. So Eileen, would you like to pose the question to Heléna?
Yeah, Heléna, thank you very much. It's marvellous to hear from you and the work in Wales. I noticed in the extension for the review of the role of the Commissioner for 2022 to 2024, the last item includes a review of the law in relation to older people. Now, I know reviewing law is a long thing, it could be 10, 15 years, but do you see it as part of your role to review the law on financial protection and security of income in retirement for older people as regards occupational pension schemes as distinct from state pension?
So, thank you, Eileen. Yeah, so I have, as Commissioner, in the law that sets out my role, it sets out 4 functions of my role as Commissioner. And one of those is to keep under review the effectiveness of law affecting the interest of older people. And within my work, so as Commissioner, I have legal powers over issues in Wales, but I don't have legal powers over issues that are reserved to the UK. And pensions is an issue, and social security, which is reserved to the UK. So it is UK Westminster ministers rather than Welsh Government ministers that deal with them. So I can and do raise issues with the UK government and push for changes that I think need to happen. And so, for example, at the moment, I'm trying to prevent an increase, a speeding up of the increase in the state pension age, which would have a very detrimental impact on older people who are particularly in ill health. So I can make those calls and do, and certainly issues around pensions, financial security, take up of financial entitlements is an area I've been working on. But my legal remit, where I have legal powers, is within Wales and issues devolved to Wales only.
Look, thank you for that. It was a tricky but good question, Eileen. I just want to acknowledge that throughout the chat box, you know, Jane Teasdale has dropped comments around what's happening in Ontario and Canada and Toronto, as has Valerie Powell, and many others. So, you know, use the chat box as a way of exchanging knowledge, but also becoming more connected. Heléna, you've mentioned the abuse of older men a couple of times, and I really would like you to say a little more about that, because it's not a topic that is brought to our attention, you know, a great deal of the time. So could you just speak a little bit about that, and then I'll go to our colleagues for one last question.
Yeah, thank you. It's an issue that came up in this action group that I'm working with. A number of people had raised the issue about abuse of older men. So we're talking particularly about domestic abuse. And we know that in the UK, including in Wales, about 1 in 4 cases of domestic abuse, domestic violence is actually men. So the vast majority is women, and a lot of our work, a lot of my work has been about you know, trying to prevent that abuse against women and providing support. But there was a key issue around men as well. And actually the risk of being abused as a man increases as you get older, so particularly higher risk for people over 75. And there'd been we could find very little research on this and very little data and evidence. So I felt it was an issue where we needed to shine a light on what was happening. And we commissioned an organisation to carry out some research with us, which spoke with men who'd experienced abuse, spoke with organisations that were trying to support victims of abuse, and also looked at the kind of data and literature that was there. And what came out from that was, I think, a very low level of awareness. For men, a sense of stigma and shame, feeling that actually as men, you know, this is something that they should be experiencing. They talked about not wanting to seek help because they felt they wouldn't be believed, because they felt they would be seen as the perpetrator of abuse rather than the victim. And that when they did seek help, there weren't necessarily the right types of support and services available to them because they were geared to women. So we've used this research to really help us think through in Wales, what can we do to improve matters? And in the summer, we'll be bringing out a progress report setting out what we've changed and things that are changing as a result of that research. The caveat I would just add is that we wanted to really research the experiences of older men. The men that came forward were mainly in their 50s and 60s. So there is still further work to do with people in their 70s and 80s for whom the issues might be a little bit different. But I think it was about getting that initial awareness and shining a light and starting the process of responding to what older men were experiencing.
There is just such tremendous leadership in the Commissioner's work. And I know that you are not the team, but your leadership within the team certainly is of an international reputation, just the way that you've actually really worked to break ground on issues that we've known that are there, but we actually haven't focused attention on them globally. So one last question from Olive Bryanton. Olive, welcome.
Thank you, Jane. My question is around ethics and technology and abuse of older adults, and just wondering if there's any work around that area.
Thank you, Olive.
It's not an area I'm working on particularly, but there is work going on more generally in Wales. There's a new framework on restrictive practices, for example, in caring for people with dementia, so looking at some of those issues. But it's not, Olive, I have to say, it's not an area I particularly looked at. It does come up from time to time. So it is an issue sometimes that's raised, particularly around within care settings as well, things like remote monitoring. There's been issues related to families wanting to put kind of security cameras in the rooms of their loved ones in care homes sometimes because they're worried about the level of care. But I have to say it's not really an issue that I've looked at specifically.
Okay, thanks very much, Olive and Heléna. One last question from me, Heléna. You have 18 months left of your tenure as Commissioner. So where do you see your work in the next 8 minutes other than being extremely busy? And what will be your legacy when you leave this particular position?
So, yes, I do have 18 months to go, which is going to go very quickly, I know. There's a lot more I want to drive through on this work on abuse. So I mentioned we're going to do a progress report in terms of older men, but a specific piece of work I want to take forward over the next year is the link between ageism and abuse. And I'd be delighted if anyone's interested in that area or issue for you to get in touch with me. I'm really pleased to see that the World Health Organization work on abuse has put ageism as the most, the key priority. But I want to look at the link between ageism and abuse, both in terms of it being a potential factor in people being abused, so cause, but also is ageism a reason why the response and the services haven't been there for older people as well? So that's certainly an issue I want to take forward. I want to continue to support and drive that work about age-friendly development in Wales as well. So, that's going really well. And I'm hoping that momentum continues. And the work we're doing on rights in Wales, particularly the rights of older people living in care homes, particularly because of what happened in the pandemic, that is also work that I'm very keen to continue. I find the legacy question really difficult, Jane, and I think it will be probably for others to judge that in due course. But what I'm hoping is that some of the partnerships me and my fantastic team have developed will continue. And there'll be a mix of, I think, over the next 18 months, us being able to say, yeah, we've achieved what we can in certain areas, but in other areas, I hope there's a platform there that others can then take forward. Because, so many of the issues we've been talking about, Jane, and that you and I have been working on for so many years are long-term issues, and it needs that continuity and continuity of purpose and commitment. So I hope, I hope that will continue way beyond my term of office.
Look, Heléna, we could have a glass of wine over this conversation, I think. I'm just going to pause you there, but I'm going to come back and ask you to give us your three takeaway messages or thereabouts. But now I'd like to introduce our next week's expert, and we will be in conversation with Kazuki Yamada from the World Health Organization. Kazuki is the technical officer for demographic change and healthy aging, but he really is at the heart of the platform of the UN Decade of Healthy Aging. So we really felt that it was time to have another conversation with Kazuki about the 2023 vision for the Decade platform. And for those that are going to be part of our global conference in Bangkok, Kazuki Yamada will be at the conference because he'll be talking about ways that all of us can get on board in strengthening and expanding the platform, which is a mechanism to drive the UN Decade of Healthy Aging. So please join with us next week. Greg Shaw will be moderating this session because my colleague Katrina Buzanis and I will be in Cartagena in Colombia at a meeting of experts around diabetic retinopathy and our work on the DR barometer. As I turn back to you, Heléna, I think the last question really is a question that many of us, struggle with. But I know many of us on the call today, serve. We are in service in the community, whatever that means to us. And I have the good fortune of being in service through the IFA and you through the Commissioner's position, but also many others. It's been inspiring to me to listen to you. And, you use the word learning together. And that's at the heart of what we do. I've learnt together today about how to work to change the narrative. The leadership that you presented through your work and what's going on in Wales is exemplary. There's no question. And before I say goodbye to you today, I would like to ask you whether you'll come back in 12 months' time and actually talk with us about what's happened in that 12 months. Because before you leave, we want to hear you again and be engaged and inspired. So I hope that you'll be able to do that. But the floor is yours. I thank my IFA colleagues who put together this Global Café and who I have the pleasure to work with. So Heléna, what are your takeaway messages to us today?
Oh, thank you, Jane. I'm absolutely delighted to come back in 12 months. So I think probably three messages really. One is about involving and engaging older people in all that we do. So, I spoke at the beginning about the importance of hearing older people's experiences who've been victims of abuse and how that has, can change hearts and minds. So I think that's really important. I think the second thing is that link between ageism and abuse. And I think ageism is at the root cause of so many of the problems that we can face as we get older. And I think if we can work on that over the next year together, we can really make some progress on that. And then I think the third issue is just what can we each do around this issue of abuse of older people? And I think we all have a role to play in increasing the awareness, in talking about it, in finding ways within our own networks to raise these questions, because the longer it's a hidden issue in the shadows, the longer it's going to take to make progress. And we owe it to older people to have those discussions and to give people safe space to be able to talk about what's happening to them. So those would be my three takeaways, Jane.
Look, thank you very much, Heléna Herklots, Older People's Commissioner for Wales. And yes, we do owe it to all those that we work with, current and future generations. So thank you very much for your time today. And I wish you well for the weekend and going forward. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.